Hi, and welcome to Global South Rising. I'm Ileana Chan with my co-host here, Sara Vivacqua. Every week on Friday, 9 a.m. BRT, 12 p.m. UTC, 8 p.m. Beijing time, we dismantle imperial narratives with analysis, opinion, and in-depth discussions on the challenges, achievements, and contradictions of building a new multipolar world. So how are you today, Sara?
I'm fine. I'm overwhelmed with events. I think so much is going on. We had the Chilean far-right president being sworn into the office in Chile, which is a horrific news. We have Paraguay accepting US bases in its own territory, which is really a problem. Ileana, as you know, Paraguay, Guyana, those are revolving doors of the organized crime. So for Trump to come there and say, well, we are fighting drugs, we fight is the war on drugs or the war on terrorists, it costs nothing. So we have here in the border of Brazil a military occupation by the US when Trump really needs to do something to save his skin and to re-elect to win the primaries. We also have Ecuador making the first office of the FBI in their territory. Trump is occupying South America. And today we're also going to talk about one of his attempts here in Brazil. So we have Paraguay, Chile, and Ecuador, part of the big MAGA plan, along with that idiot that listened to his dogs, talked to his dogs, which I despise to put his name on my mouth. It feels like shit in the mouth, which is the Argentinian so-called president. So we're seeing an escalation of Trump in Latin America, and we're going to talk about this. What about you, Ileana?
Yeah, so we'll be talking about that. I'm going to put the graphic up. We are going to be talking about two laws that have just been passed from the China 2 sessions, which wrapped up, I think, on Wednesday. We are going to be talking, as you said, Sara, your watch is going to be on Trump's Brazil envoy, in Brazil. And then if we have time, we're going to do the BYD, break some records, just for some fun news. And then, of course, we're going to do some updates on Iran. So we've got a lot here. And plus, João Amorim is going to be joining us at 1 p.m. here, like in London, 1 p.m. He will be joining us with his own watch, which is a really interesting one on how the Global South is consistently paying for the Global North chaos and destruction. So this week we do have a lot of different things to cover, and I'm pretty excited about it. But first, let's say hi to some of our commenters. Rafael from Brazil, first commenter. Hi, Rafael. And then Taiwan still is not a country. Taiwan isn't a country. I have to read that properly. Who is from an EU vassal state. Don't know which one because it's 27. So hopefully you're keeping safe over there. But I think first up, we're going to talk about the two laws coming out of the two sessions. And then we'll go into some of the chaos in Latin America, or some of the updates on Iran, actually. Okay, cool. So I'm going to see if I can pull this up. But yeah, so two really interesting things that have come out of the two sessions, two laws. The first one, I mean, both of them specifically, why am I covering both of them? Because they're domestic laws, but of course they do affect us internationally. The first one is that China has codified an ecological and environmental code. So it's a law that's actually legislation that aims to consolidate like dozens of environmental regulations into a unified legal framework covering pollution control, ecological protections, and climate governance. In essence, China is attempting to turn years of environmental policy into a coherent rule book for the green transition. So unlike the fragmented patchwork of statutes in the United States or the directive-based approach of the European Union, China has unified over 30 separate laws into a single comprehensive code of 1,242 articles. And this is particularly significant because it integrates climate frameworks like it integrates climate change, circular economy, and green transition into a single binding legal framework, something that no other country has done. And in terms of penalty severity, the code is amongst the world's toughest, with fines increased up to, I'm going to just remove this because I'm not reading from that. So with fines increased up to tenfold for certain violations and daily penalties that can accumulate indefinitely until compliance is achieved. It also leads in addressing emergent pollutants like light pollution and electromagnetic radiation, which most Western countries still regulate through health agencies rather than environmental law. And this is all towards a goal for the nationwide zero waste city coverage by 2035. So it's an extremely comprehensive environmental code, and I think it is a game changer. I'm just going to do a little bit of an update on what the roadmap is to 2035, right? Because they always implement things like in stages because they actually mean it. So by 2027, 60% of Chinese cities are expected to participate in zero waste city construction, with solid waste generation intensity significantly reduced. And then from 2026 to 2030, so that's part of the 15, we talked about this 5-year plan that just basically was announced like a few months ago. So this is the 15th 5-year plan. So in 2030 will be the end of that 5-year plan period. The program will expand from the current 113 cities and 8 special regions to approximately 200 cities. So by 2035, it will be full national coverage. And of course, the circular economy, which is this keystone of this zero waste city thing, is about reduction, minimizing waste creation at the source, then resource utilization, treat waste as a misplaced valuable resource that can be used, for other things, and harmless disposal 3. So it's safety precautions, etc. This is actually kind of interesting in many different ways to me, because obviously reduction, minimize waste creation at the source means that the push, that capitalism has for constant consumerism, China's going against that. And one of the things that the West is always saying about China is like, oh my God, the domestic consumerism, the domestic demand is lowering and decreasing. But while they are dealing with certain domestic demand issues, they're also very, very putting this as a main priority, which is waste reduction, So they're actually not encouraging this sort of unethical consumerism. So it's quite a different approach, and it's very interesting. What do you think? I mean, you have experience in this field, actually. So
yeah, I have sort of relevant experience. I used to do legislation for DEFRA, which is the Department for Food, Agriculture, and so on. So it's like the environmental ministry in the UK. So when you say to me that China has consolidated in one single piece a commitment, this is, legally speaking, extremely important. One of the most difficult things in legal terms, in terms of legislation, is to have a system, a consolidated system. This is something that Germans did very well. Germans have they have in a single consolidated code the entire system of protection. For instance, emissions, they have an emission code. Everything that is emission, it's a structure. You have a general part and you have a specific part. This is one of the most difficult tasks for any legislation. But what do you have, for example, in Britain, or what do you have in America is a fragmentation, lots of pieces of things that don't fit together, that have no harmony, that don't work together. One is enforced by one agency, the other is enforced by local authorities, the other is enforced by if it's enforced. There is no system of protection. So when you're telling me that China has one code protecting everything, this is extreme work of legal expertise to put all that together. And this is something we don't have in the UK at all. We have fragmented legislation, bits and bobs that don't dialogue with each other at some point, that causes conflict in interpretation, and it's a hindrance. Most of the times they are a hindrance. So this is the first point I have to address in terms of legal sophistication. To have a code and a system is key when you're talking about environmental protection. It's consistency, coherence, but it's much more than that. It's a system. And when you're talking about reduction at source, this is the most important part, because it talks about the production. It talks about how you produce things in order not to turn goods into waste. If you go to a British supermarket, the amount of packaging you need to open before you get your hands in a piece of fruit, is absolutely anachronic. This is the thinking of another century. Yeah, this is the thing absolutely not in line with the climate emergency that we are living. And you have to think China achieves all of that without raging wars, without putting bombs. China's economic growth is not based on colonial efforts. And more than that, China understands that the environment is something that its national interest, its international interest, is a humanity commitment. And if you have to have an environment, you need to invest. And you're not going to get anything necessarily in terms of commodity and money back. This is an investment that has a huge impact, but it's not quantifiable in money.
Well,
and this is a language that other countries do not speak, and they are completely hijacked by industry. I'll give an example. In the British Ministry, Environment Ministry, the immense lobby of the industry is at times far superior than the lobby of environmental groups. They tied up any initiative. They put problems on the initiatives. There's a lot of good, willing people on those environmental ministry in the UK, people who are highly prepared, technically excellent people, trying to push for legislation, but you have this incredible lobby that hinders everything, and that doesn't seem to be a problem with China.
Yeah. And I mean, I think there are, like, just to sort of not pick hairs, but to give some sort of context, is that, obviously the green energy investments in China have also made money for companies, smaller companies, etc. But the thing is, it's a patient way of doing it. They're willing to invest in the technologies that are required. They're willing to adjust the regulations for safety or efficacy before going into the profit. And the profit margins that they accept are often much smaller than the ones that Western companies accept. But to your point about the lobby thing, we actually covered this, like, I think a few weeks ago, where we talked about how the Trump administration delivered what it was very proudly announcing as the single largest act of deregulation in the history of the United States, by repealing the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency's 2009 endangerment finding, the legal foundation for all federal climate regulation under the Clean Air Act, which obviously will greatly impact that country's ability to create any other laws that will protect the environment, because they're taking away the 2009 endangerment finding. So basically, they're saying that they are disagreeing with this idea that greenhouse gases actually affect human lives. They've taken that.
Ileana, you don't even need to be a negationist and say that climate change is a hoax.
Right.
In the UK, you did have a huge deregulation campaign, and they used Brexit to deregulate. They were trying to pass, thank God the House of Lords banned this legislation. It was called the freedom bill, which would just, in a stroke of a pen, remove all legislation, environmental legislation coming from the EU, unless you would save it, expressly save it. This was the Tory plan for the environment in the UK. Thank God it didn't work out, but it's all about deregulating, any possibility of regulating. And what shocks me as well is their response to crisis. Now we have Iran causing the major energetic disruption, probably in our time. And I bet here one arm of mine, I'll bet this arm, that they will talk about atomic energy. They will be talking about this type of things, coal mining. And this is a very old thinking, because when you say about the zero waste cities, we have the technology. For instance, Germany, you have a technology which you don't really apply. Canada, you have it's the houses that can self-maintain itself and produce an exceedance of energy to go to other communities which are, let's say, disadvantaged. So you would have buildings that not only do not waste energy, but are capable of producing energy and redistributing energy within the city. This technology exists. It's available. It's not difficult. But instead of like producing more energy, what you have to do is producing more efficiency. It's not about having more and more energy production. It's to having systems that effectively use less energy. This is the thinking. And those basic thinking that we learn maybe in 5th grade at school, they cannot apply them.
Well, there's also a real reason for it, right? Because Trump doing this by repealing this environmental code themselves, or I guess it's not a code; it's an act of the act, a deregulation. I mean, the whole point of it is he's saying that climate is a scam. They're making the U.S. incredibly dependent on oil, and yet they need the oil from places like Iran. It's not because they're just purely stupid, okay? It's easy to be like, oh, they're just stupid. But also they realize that this oil control, it's a way to exert control over the entire world by making people dependent on these fossil fuels. It is part of the geopolitical strategy of imperialism. So that's kind of but the thing that is ironic in the situation is that they're also caught in the trap of their own making, right? Because they're also yeah, and that is a little bit more about my watch later, but yeah, we'll get to it. And so now, anything else to say before I move on to the second law that was passed? Okay, so the second law that was passed from the 2 sessions this year was a law promoting ethnic unity and progress. And I just want to pull up this tweet because this really is very much, it just very much shows how the Western media looks at something like this. So Eric Havergam, I don't know who he is, sorry, but he just said, China just passed a new law further protecting ethnic minority languages and history, yet this is how Reuters is choosing to cover it. So we just highlight this, but look at Reuters. Reuters says, China passed a law on a shared national identity among the country's 55 ethnic minority groups, a move critics say will further erode the identity of people who are not majority Han Chinese and risk making anyone challenging that unity a separatist, punishable by law. Okay, so let's go into this. I'm going to show you also this video that I just took this screenshot video of the headlines that are coming out of the Western media, which is basically echoing this Reuters thing. And it was like a ridiculous idea of this Han assimilation is what they're basically saying here. And I'm going to explain why that is not necessarily true. That's not true at all.
Incredible. They spin it into the opposite.
Yeah, they spin it into the opposite because
if we actually very opposite.
Completely the opposite. And I think it is quite an interesting thing because we have to look at why Oh, it's in Chinese, guys, but I'm just going to read this quote. It's been translated. It's been translated. Disaster averted. But basically, from this, I'm going to quote from it. It says, the idea is to promote all ethnic groups to hug each other like pomegranate seeds. I mean, it's very sweet. I know, Sarah, you're like, oh my God. But this is
I
what
just follow the water, because I would have been.
Well, no, I mean, this is what the Chinese actually want to do. Okay. So they actually do believe this, that China is a pomegranate. It sounds better in Chinese.
This is cheesy. Sorry, I'll have to criticize that. This is pomegranate thing is cheesy. I love pomegranate, but it's just so cheesy.
It is cheesy. And that's a thing that we have to understand about Chinese so-called propaganda. The way that they distribute messages is through idioms like this. And in Chinese, of course, it's more poetic than the translation into English. But it's a way that every single thing that they pass basically will have something like this. A metaphor that makes it very simple for the average person to understand.
Just like their own language, right? Their writing is through metaphors, through symbolism. The whole Chinese philosophy is through symbolism, and mostly and many times in allusion to nature, right?
Yes, exactly. And it's also so that the average person in a village somewhere doesn't need to see the whole thing. They can get this idea of a pomegranate. They understand how closely pomegranate seeds are because they've seen a pomegranate. You know what I mean? But if you actually read through it, then you'll see that there are actual material conditions that have been improved for ethnic minorities. So they talk about here how all 424 counties located in ethnic autonomous areas have been lifted out of poverty. We know that they did this by the end of 2020. And all 28 ethnic groups with small populations, so these are the minority groups, have been lifted out of poverty. From 2020 to 2024, the total GDP of the 5 autonomous regions will increase from 6 billion yen to 8.3 billion yen. So even though it's a very flowery, poetic, announcement, they back it up with, here are the actual statistics, the tangible conditions that will change for ethnic minorities and have changed for ethnic minorities. And this, of course, scares the West a lot. But just to go further, so the language that they're saying, and we're going to go into it a little bit more, this is the language that is twisted by the West, because the draft closely follows the people's yearning for a better life of all ethnic groups, involves people's livelihood concerns such as a new rural collective economy, education, ecological protection, and public service facilities, and will solidly promote the common prosperity of all ethnic groups. That is from the Tibetan secretary of the party in the Porongtang village in Tibet. So every single, we've talked about this before, but the NPC, which is the National People's Congress, every single ethnicity is actually represented there. So over 400 deputies are represented from minority ethnic groups. That's a lot more representation that we have in the West.
It's amazing. Like if you see Brazil, which is a country that has over 200 languages. I was indoctrinated at school that Portuguese was my official language, but of this country. But we have indigenous languages that have survived. It's like almost 300, and is any of those ethnical groups represented? And many more ethnical groups represented in parliament in Brazil? No.
None
No,
at all?
none of them are. No, I mean, there's some woke and cultural appropriation, and some that are there in really empty ministries with no budgets, but there are no effective representation of a country that is built on African blood, indigenous blood, and Europeans, Asians, so where is but fine, the larger part of Brazilian society is mixed. So we identify ourselves not through our ancestry, but we have a huge large of our society that lives completely apart of the state, has no representation whatsoever. And then you have this woke liberation, and that actually destroys the struggle of
Because
minority.
there's no genuine representation, right? And so I think to understand why the West has okay, obviously we know that the West is going to demonize China no matter what, but to understand why it's effective in the West is because Western perspective is very different when it comes to ethnicity. First, for starters, even though there's a lot about like the Han majority, I would be Han, considered Han, but even within Han, like, so on a cultural level, like I'm Han, but my parents are from the Fujian, not my parents, my grandparents are from the Fujian area, which is where like Taiwan was also part of as well. And so we have our own dialect that is actually very different from Cantonese. But Cantonese people are also considered Han. So you have already like 7 to 10 dialects, which are essentially different languages in the Han majority, but we all share the same script. So that's why it's a dialect rather than a completely different language, right? But because I think there's also on a cultural level, there's a complete understanding of the differences, because Cantonese food is different. Like Cantonese people in general, their build is different. They're generally smaller, shorter, smaller bone. These are generalizations, but you will have like differences even within the Han majority that we gladly accept. There's no prejudice, really, not genuine one. We understand that it's like very much part of like the Chinese culture to understand these differences. So there's that part. And also, I also think the main thing is, I'm not saying like, oh, Chinese people are just inherently not racist. No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that racism, and we've talked about this many times before, I think racism is cultivated because of imperialism, because imperialism needs racism to actually continue to exist. You have to be able to justify why you can get rid of an entire country, get rid of an entire ethnic group. And racism also, in terms of capitalism, is extremely useful within its domestic context, because you then have like things like in the US, getting rid of like what was considered the Black Wall Street, for example. You know what I mean? There's like all these, when you have capitalism, you are so insistent on like this very, very small percentage of the population hoarding all the capital, and you have to make a justification for why that is necessary. And racism is one of the very clear reasons why they do that. So there's that part. So again, even though this law, like you said, seems very corny. I mean, you weren't meaning the whole law, but the way it's presented can be quite corny, right? When we're just looking at the messaging. It's also from a very intelligent way of approaching what China does understand, that the US is using many different strategies for war against China and war against all countries that want to be sovereign.
Yes, exactly. Right?
So racism is a clear one. They have backed terrorist separatist groups across the world, right? And Uyghurs in Xinjiang, they're even trying to create a separate identity in Taiwan. This is one of their main weapons against sovereign countries. Divide and conquer. It's the oldest playbook of colonialism. And the US is going to try to do that. So this law is actually a reaction to that. Unity within the different minorities, but also in a tangible way, as in they're actually going to be making all minorities' lives better. Because how do these terrorist groups find and recruit people? It's always the most vulnerable of society. That's how they get you. You have to feel like you have something to gain by joining a terrorist group. You can't actually have a ton to lose by joining something like that. You know what I mean? So it's a really smart way to do it. I think it is obviously genuine, but this is also another way in which they counter what they know, is one of the weapons of imperialism.
I was going to say exactly that it just shows that China has a very comprehensive understanding of what this hybrid war looks like. And China has the legacy of the Cultural Revolution and has a huge 5,000-year history. So I think they're very well equipped to understand the challenges, and they are showing they are. You know, if you think this cooptation, we have also internal cooptation. Bolsonaro, when he wanted to break open the Amazon for illegal mining, and his American friends of the South gone, he gathered with indigenous people and say, why do you want environmental protection? Because you could be the miner yourself, you could be the farmer yourself, you could be making a lot of money in the forest. And he co-opted a lot of the indigenous with us. So this cooptation tool is far more powerful than anything else because it works with your own consent, you know. So before you see you're crossing your own red line.
Yeah, exactly. It's a divide and conquer again, right? It's like against collective power, which is so much.
And if I see the others as a racial difference, racially different, or whatever race means, because I mean, let's be honest. I was doing my DNA test until the 1860. All my ancestry were Africans. Yeah, not long ago. All my ancestry came from Africa. And then came some other people in between. So whatever race means, or whatever your phenotype may indicate your race, this is a very good way of labeling people and dehumanize them as less as subhumans or whatever. And then it's okay. You can kill, you can do whatever you want, just like in Palestine, you know?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And also, I mean, once you get rid of this sort of like this racist hierarchy, then you can actually just focus on appreciating different cultures, different language, different food, you know, which is very much more what China does. And it's not really a homogenous society. People say that a lot, but if you've actually been there, it's not homogenous at all. So I think it's kind of that's another interesting thing that they used to smear, because they're like all Asians look the same, but actually there's so many.
It's a very European perspective to think you need to be very homogenic in order to create a nation. This is a fundamentally European idea of a nation. We need to look at Germany, like their federal system. Every city looks the same. Every city has the same shops, the same institutions, the same everything. Every German, you need to look blonde with blue eyes to be considered as equal in Germany. So this idea of homogeneity society, as it's good for control, but it's great for control. It's probably much easier, but it's a very European perspective of idealizing, of creating a nation.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So now should we move on to one of your many news items that you wanted to tell?
So I don't think we have time for everything, but I think we need to talk about Iran.
Yes.
We've seen Iran. I think what the US don't get is that Iran is not a country. It's a civilization that has been there before, despite, and will be after the decline of the US empire or the European colonial venture in the region. And Iran thinks strategically, and Iran, despite not being a military powerhouse, if you compare, well, Israel is a nuclear powerhouse. The US is, if US is hegemonic in anything, it's their military force. They are losing everything else, but they still are military hegemon. And they are incapable to meet their own political goals, as we talked here with Matthew Hall.
Yes. Yeah? And my watch is going to go deeper into that. So I'm excited about that. But yes, that is what they're most proud of, for sure.
Yeah. And now Netanyahu and Trump decided that they think they will just, well, Iran is a divided country. We're just going to bump their leaderships and this will dismantle. I don't know. I think Trump believed in that. I do think he's surrounded by the most ignorant of, let's say, people who think the earth is flat. Lindsey Graham, this Peter Hegath, whatever this surname's called, Marco Rubio. I'm not sure if Netanyahu thought that, but he was probably tricking Trump into invading Iran. And those crazy, and they are really having a defeat, a clear defeat. I mean, it's becoming absolutely undeniable. And we saw Iran closing the Strait of Hormuz and created one of the biggest energetic crises now. And you know what, Ileana? Iran is so intelligent. You don't need to bomb every single ship that goes through the Strait of Hormuz. You just need to create a risk. Because all those ships going there, they are insured. And once the ships are traveling through troubled waters of war, the insurance goes up. And those are the brokers in London who are calculating right now the insurance. Yeah.
I mean, I was listening to something. I mean, I would disagree with your Netanyahu assessment. I mean, I think, okay, so just a caveat there. I think that the reports that Israel is controlling the US in this, again, complete disagreement from me. I know a lot of, in my opinion, it's completely US propaganda and wanting to not have responsibility for this. But they've been going after Iran since 1953, where they emerged.
Yeah, they are independently of their, Iran is a established enemy of the US, but I think like Biden administration, they didn't want to go for Iran. They had a bit of a intelligence.
They also, during the Biden administration and Kamala Harris, I remember, talked specifically about Iran being the number one enemy as well. So they're gearing up for this. But I think to your point where it's correct, I think that Trump is a little bit of a weird figure because it's not clear how much he does know. Like it's just, he's always sort of says 100 things and you kind of assume he might believe one of them. You just don't know what he's saying, like what he believes.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. Iran is established enemy of the US. And I have to say the test was the Ajax operation in Iran. Now that the hybrid warfare began with the Ajax operation in Iran. Iran is a threat for the US, no matter which administration. And it was a threat to US before even Israel was in the picture, no doubt about it. But I think when you have two completely maniacs.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly I think of them
like a folie à deux that went really wrong.
Yeah, that's what my watch is going to be about. I think I am also perplexed with how badly they seem to have miscalculated everything. One of the things I was seeing today was, what's his name? Scott Besson. Is it Scott Besson? He was saying that the U.S. Navy, along with international allies, will be maybe accompanying these naval ships through the Strait of Hormuz.
Ileana, as I was talking, you don't need to bomb every single ship. You just need to increase the risk of going through that passage. And these are the brokers for London doing the job for Iran, because the brokers are London. Now the insurance brokers are saying, well, it's really, really high risk to go there. So your premium is going to be so high that it's no longer good enough for you to, it's inviable now to go through. So actually, Iran is using London brokers to make impossible the passage.
Right.
And not only that,
again.
the absolutely brilliant strategy. You bomb a few ones, you bomb a petrol, they know how to apply the force with precision and only the necessary. Instead of bombing every single ship, they just increase the risk of going through those waters, and the London brokers will do the job for them. And it's going to be very prohibitive, and is already very prohibitive, to go through the Hormuz Strait. This is absolutely brilliant strategy from Iran. Whatever side you are, you have to recognize this.
I'm wondering now, how Chinese ships that have Chinese flags on it, they're allowed through. So I'm wondering now if people are going to put Chinese flags on.
Yeah, And on top of that, Iran doesn't stop being brilliant. Iran, so we have here from Dawn saying, well, but this is being widely reported. Iran says countries that expel US and Israel envoys can navigate the Strait of Hormuz. Iran, I'm reading here, Iran Revolutionary Guards say any Arab or European country that expels the ambassadors of Israel and the US from its territory will have full authority and freedom to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Reuters has reported, citing Iran Strait media. How genius is this, Ileana? How genius is this? And now we have here, I think you pull up for us a declaration if you want to read it. I am, here we have, maybe you want to read this.
This is from, I mean, I don't think we can read the whole thing, but this is Ali Abanima from Electronic Intifada. And he's talking about taking some notes from the statement from the IRGC spokesperson, Ibrahim Zolvagahi. Sorry, guys. Sorry. It's a very, let me say, very assertive statement.
Yeah, totally.
So yeah, by force, we will not permit 1 liter of oil will pass through the strait for the US, the Zionists, and their accomplices. Any ship working for them that tries to pass will be a legitimate target. So exactly what you're saying. And they are aware as well of this whole thing about hiding in civilian places and behind infrastructure will not shield your cowardly army from the trap you have placed yourself in. The trap you've placed yourself in, exactly. Your bases and places will be targeted one after the other. You will burn in the fire you started. The period of tit-for-tat strikes is over. We have entered a period of continuous strikes until you are punished and regret what you have done. Wow. So this is really, I mean, it's calling out the US absolutely one by one. And actually, okay, in this part too, from the start of the war, we told you to get ready for $200 per barrel of oil. So,
and I mean, you have to say, like, the oil spikes again. So the price is over $100 a barrel.
Yeah, so they're saying $200 per barrel, and you will not be able to use artificial measures to bring down oil prices. So we're going to really, I mean, we're going to be seeing that. Like right now, if we're saying 100, I think it went up to 120, and then it went back down again when Trump was like, oh, you know, the war is going to be over. It's almost finished the other day, but it's obviously not almost finished.
Yeah, and if you think, the American press is calling this the largest supply disruption in history, while the US is deepening its dependency with oil, as you just mentioned. So alone for this reason, we're already thinking, Iran is thinking strategically. Iran is showing the upper hand here without a doubt.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, we do. The cost is very, very high. So we don't want to minimize that the cost for Iran to be fighting basically holding this anti-imperialist line for us is extremely high. But they have been ready. You know, they have been preparing for this for decades because they know.
And the dystopic rhetoric of the US is also flabbergasting, because what they would say, if you read everywhere, BBC, but also US, before justifying the attacks on Iran, well, this was the right time to attack Iran because they have a divided society. Let me show you the divided society of Iran. We have here this post from Carlos, a friend of the show. Iranians have come onto the streets literally in their millions today, across 900 different cities and towns, in the face of a genocidal US bombing campaign to express the enduring solidarity with the Palestinian people. Meanwhile, Britain, the Quds Day march has been banned. Which country stands for freedom, justice? Look at this. Amid bombing, look at the amount of people in Iran going into the streets. Can you really say this is a broken, fragmented society? Because, I mean, what they wanted is, especially Israel, they wanted a fragmented state, just like Syria, just like Libya. This is the plan. that you are surrounded by dysfunctional, fragmented state. And they thought Iran would be one of them. Surprise, surprise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to see how long this lasts. We have no idea, obviously, how much longer this war will last. And it does feel like a definitive moment, though. So obviously, we're going to be keeping an eye on this and see what happens. But should I actually cover the VYD blade battery and flash charging?
Please do.
Just because it's a fun one.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I do want to say that I did get it from News on China. I don't know if you guys, I'm going to just share this tab. So I don't know if you guys remember Dongsheng. I love Dongsheng, which is part of the Tricontinental Asia Institute, Tricontinental Social Research Institute. Dongsheng, I had Ting's Chak, who is from Dongsheng, twice on my show, and I'm hoping to have her back on. They used to do this roundup of news of Asia. They stopped for a while, but they're back again. So I would just suggest people read this. If they want just like 10-minute read, I think they do it every week now, and they sort of do like a roundup of things that you should know about China. And they separate it into different things like geopolitics, national politics, economy, agriculture, environment, science and technology. So it's like people in life, culture, etc. So yeah. So basically, it's just a nice little roundup for people who want to know more about what's happening in China in different areas. They're also based in Beijing, or some of them are. So, you get a lot of actual things about like what's actually happening in China. So I would suggest just reading it for fun. I'm just going to recommend that. But they also showed this part, which is about the humanoid robot standard. So this is interesting too, because this one, they're saying that the humanoid robots that we have been seeing, during the Spring Festival celebrations, those robots that have been doing like Kung Fu dancing and stuff, they're actually going to be rolling that out for like mass consumption. So that's interesting. If you need a robot to like get your groceries or like clean, I want a robot to clean my house personally. But the other thing that they showed, right, that would be great. The other thing they showed was this, I'm just gonna show this. The BYD can charge an EV in under 10 minutes. Like, that is insane. So basically, overseas shipments surpass domestic sales for the first time as BYD unveils 5-minute flash charging and next generation battery. So on March 5th in Shenzhen, BYD unveiled a 1.5K watt flash charging system, restoring 400 kilometers of range in 5 minutes, and a second generation blade battery delivering over 1,000 kilometers per charge. The event capped a month in which overseas shipments of 100,600 new energy vehicles surpassed domestic sales for the first time, highlighting BYD's technological lead over Western automakers, which have collectively taken billions in EV-related write-downs. So that's a pretty significant. I mean, that's amazing, because I think, can you imagine like 10 minutes to charge your entire battery for an EV? I don't even drive anymore, but...
Yeah. If you contrast that with the fact, for instance, that Germany is closing a lot of automobile industry, which were their classic industry, we're seeing this year many closures in Germany.
Yeah, and we want to sort of position this because this is one of the things that I think the EU uses against China, kind of like this fear that China is going to take over all the industries, and essentially, so that's why they have to look at China as an adversary. And I think there are elements to it, like China does do protectionism for its own industries. So there are elements where protectionism works, but if you have protectionism and only a capitalist system, that's where you're going to have all the issues that you're going to, the traps basically that you fall into in the EU are to do with capitalism.
Because you have to protect your national interest. I think this is beyond discussion, isn't it? You have to. feed your people, you have to take care of your, I mean, this is beyond discussion. The problem is to go and steal other people, plunder, rape, bomb.
The problem is their own domestic companies would rather make a bigger profit by outsourcing everything. Or even if, say, you want to outsource the lower skilled workers, like the lower skilled manual labor sector, which actually China is beginning to do, because China wants to go from the world factory to the world innovator. You know, they're moving stages.
Yeah.
So they are automating a lot of industries that before it was like a person doing like this, you know, whatever. But in the West, we don't have that sort of strategic central planning economy. So we don't think in that way. And we just like...
No, it's the free market. It's the hand of free market regulating our lives. I've never seen the hand of free market, but the hand of free market is everywhere, in every discussion, in every decision.
It's just an excuse for them to make as much profit as possible, to exploit their own people as well as people overseas. And then they blame China for the fact that they don't have these protections. They need protectionism for their own industries, but they need to protect their own people first. I mean, that is the issue here that, you know, we're facing. So anyway, that is one of my...
I have a horrible news here to share with everyone. But is reported by The Guardian. I think it just shows there is no limits for the axis of perversion. I think Israel has become a lab of human perversion, as an order that I have never read in any history books. So The Guardian has reported that the Israeli military drops the charges against the soldiers accused of Gaza detainee abuse. So we talked about this. We know we had five soldiers. They were accused of really violently abusing and raping a Palestinian detainee from Gaza. It was the said Tayman detention center. I think this was widely reported. We have here footage of this rape. And we have footage of the rape. We have medical records, you know, showing the severe injuries. So we have a military indictment saying that the Palestinian detainee was blindfolded, bounded, beaten, sodomized. They used like a sharp object that penetrated near his rectum, causing really severe injuries, multiple surgeries. And Israel is not saying there is no evidence that he has been raped. So and the UN even concluded that those abuses were not one-off, as we know. It's sexual violence is one of the weapons of war, of torture. But the UN itself said this is happening in a systematic manner. We have reportedly 75 Palestinian detainees dying in Israel jails. This is a state policy. Yeah. And they are so comfortable with that. I think, Ileana, for people who cannot see this is really brutal. This is the lack of evidence that Israel is claiming. This is footage of the rape. We see here they are getting the Palestinian detainee. They covered with their shields, and they will start to rape him using objects. And Israel is not saying, no, we have no evidence whatsoever this has happened. You know, these are people that go raping. Look at that. And then Netanyahu and the whole, and you know what is more flabbergasting, Ileana, that the whole society, Israeli society, believe there is a right to rape Palestinians.
I remember that one of the people caught on video, he went on a game show or talk show.
Yes, here we have him. He went on a comedy show after revealing himself. Look at that.
Maybe we should just mute that.
So this is the guy who came and uncovered his face and say, I was one of the soldiers raping this Palestinian. We have a confession, and he goes into a comedy show, and they are making fun of it. This shows the level of tolerance of this society with violence. We have a huge problem here. We have a completely disrupted society. Look at him. This is him revealing himself, Ileana. Shabbat Shalom, people of Israel. I am the guy, Mir, from Unity 100. Hello to everyone.
So basically now there is, you're saying that there is an update on this case and they're found not guilty. Is that what's happening?
No, they're not even charges. The charges were dropped. Because one thing is to say there is not enough evidence to convict someone, but it's a much lower bar to say we don't have enough to indict. If this isn't enough to indict, what is enough to indict?
Mm-hmm.
We're saying that we're moving off the table as if this has never existed. It's justified. That's the truth. It's justified. In Israel, it's justified to do that. In Israel, it's justified to kill Palestinian children and say Hamas is using them as human shields because every Palestinian is a terrorist in the eyes of an Israeli. This is fascism. This is Nazism. This is perversion. This is a very, very dangerous ideology, and we need to combat this.
And we also need to remember this is the function of that colonial entity in that region.
Yeah.
Okay. This is not, does Israel have a right to exist as a country? It's not that. It is not that. It doesn't have a right. Like we all either exist or we don't exist. We don't have rights to do that. And also its entire function is this.
If he ever had a right to exist, has defeated its right to exist. If anyone would argue that a colonial force has a right to come and do what it does, it has defeated.
Yeah, no one has that right, but countries don't even have a right to exist. Countries just exist. And in this case, it doesn't even rise to the level of a genuine country. It is simply an entity that is formed as this function. And this is another reminder of that. So, it is past time for it to be over, I think. But having said that, we actually have João in the studio. Are we going to move on from something horrific? João was actually going to talk about more of the cost of this war and more of the cost of imperialism. So that's going to be a lot of fun, but let's bring him on.
More horrific, right?
I know, but
I promise I'll try to end up in a positive with a positive outcome.
We're getting depressed here. We're getting depressed.
Yeah, it's horrible what you were just showing. I just want to comment quickly on it. We're having, I think some of what happens, this type of violence that happens in Israel is something that unfortunately is permeating throughout the world, right? And it has to do with the desensibilization of the youth towards violence. And there's a lot of instruments of empire, definitely social networks and violent video games that help that. In fact, I've seen, I don't know if you've ever seen like inside of a Israeli helmet, the soldier, everything looks like a video game, right? It's all digitized. So it's like you would depersonify this whole relation. So it's terrible. I
think there's definitely levels to that. And also there's the AI thing. I know you talked about AI last week, João. But the idea that they're using AI right now in the US military, and often they're saying when they use the models, like in war games and stuff, the AI often suggests nuclear attack as the end game, So it's really scary what we're looking at. But also I think, I always have to harp on this, but we have to not forget that this type of colonial barbarity has happened like for hundreds of years. It happens all over Africa, and even in Korea, there was a genocide there from the US, genocide in Korea. They killed 20% of the population. They destroyed, they destroyed like every village and every town.
But they never did this in the name of democracy, using the Holocaust.
Yeah.
I think now it's more explicit, and we have these media tools, right?
Israel is the moral justification. We are victims of Holocaust. Now we can do whatever, and we are spreading democracy. This is
Yeah, they're all doing that. They've done that for hundreds of years, but now we're actually witnessing it and realizing. At least before this, we were like, "Oh, but people don't know," Now we don't have that excuse anymore. Everybody knows,
Yeah.
But
all right.
But welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Good morning. Good afternoon in England. So yeah, this week I wanted to bring up a subject that is somewhat related to what Sara was talking about, and it has to do with how the war in Iran is evolving and the price of fuel and diesel worldwide. So just yesterday, Mojtaba Khamenei, Iran's new supreme leader, he's a man who lost his father, his mother, and his wife to Israeli bombs, just 11 days ago. He issued his first public statement saying that they're going to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed and expel American bases from the Gulf, and the revenge is not finished. It's important to point out, independent of what we think of the Iranian regime and of Khamenei himself, that 20% of the world's oil moved through that strait. So oil has already jumped from $65 a barrel to $100 a barrel, and Iran is saying it's going to go up to 200. So this has direct implications, specifically, I think, to the global South. Southeast Asia is already rationing energy. In Brazil, President Lula was forced to zero federal taxes on diesel this week. Diesel is the fuel that is behind agriculture today. If diesel prices go up, you can't run the machines that pump the water. You can't harvest. So it's a huge issue. In his own words, in his own words of President Lula, the fault is of the irresponsibility of war. So the reasoning behind the increase of this fuel price is the irresponsibility of war. So the global South did not start this war. However, the global South is already paying for it. So that's something that I wanted to bring to the table. And this mechanism that is taking place is not complicated. It's just invisible to the people who never feel it. As conflict escalates, risk premiums spike on trading screens in London and New York. Diesel prices are going to go up, and a small farmer in Brazil or in Senegal who already paid like 45 to 63% more than somebody that is in a coastal economy, somebody in the center of the continent, is going to be hit, twice as hard with this. And in many cases, it's basically a door closing, and as fertilizer prices exceeded 200% above baseline after 2022, we end up having how does that affect the global South? We have an increase in the price of food, and in the end of the day, when a family in the Sahel, for instance, is hit by something like this, where the prices of food go up 50%, that already accounts in average to about 70% of their income. What are they going to cut? Well, how can they save money? They're going to cut with medical expenses, with maybe some savings that they were having to expand their house or something. So you basically survive this year by making next year harder, So I think, what I'm trying to get to this is that, this irresponsibility of this war has a effect on the global South that is terrible. While people, in Washington and in New York are looking at stock prices and, other people, they might be just, not being able to eat because of this, So, taking it back to Africa, the commodities exporters there, 3% of the final retail value of their produce is what they retain, so it's minimum already. And now with this price of the increase of the price of fuel, it's like they lose everything. So, while these people are, struggling to export food, the U.S. is spending $2 billion a day on this war. $2 billion a day. So one side pays in treasury abstractions. The other side pays on essentially household survival. And this week, to make things even more complicated, Washington announced the Shield of Americas, right? It's a 17-nation shield, according to the White House, against CELAC, 33 members. So it's preparing to designate also Brazilian criminal organizations as terrorist groups. So this was actually announced this week.
Oh yeah, João, explain to us, why is this so problematic?
Yeah, so this is something that we kind of saw that coming after the massacre last year in Rio. Essentially, in Brazil, we do have drug cartels that are very strong and that operate almost as parallel states in some parts of Brazilian favelas and in poor communities. However, in fact, in Brazil specifically, there's a lot of links between these groups and the extreme right. So it's funny how those things are. But designating them as a terrorist group opens up the possibility for intervention, right? So if you designate, look, this is a real threat. We have terrorist groups in Brazil operating, and in fact, the U.S. was ready to send a U.S. official representative to talk to Bolsonaro in jail. I mean, imagine, that's completely absurd. The same day that Trump made this announcement that he qualified these criminal organizations as terrorist groups, they designate a spokesperson to talk to a former president who's in prison for an attempted coup, And in fact, our Supreme Court justice was actually going to allow it. And it was only because of internal pressure that he did it. He was ready to allow it because he's trying to save his own neck, and some other scandals we have going on in Brazil. But it's very dangerous, and I think there's an escalating tension in Latin America. Lula was due in Washington, in fact, this week, and they postponed the meeting because of the war and all of that. But everybody is very tense in what is the potential outcome of such a meeting in this situation. It's important to highlight that the meeting that was held in Florida around the announcement of the Shield of Americas, Lula was not invited towards that. I don't know if he wanted to be invited or not, but regardless, it's important to remark. So it's like it kind of orients us on what is really the objective of this Shield of Americas. And I think to conclude, because it's 10 minutes, right? And I know that last time I talked for too long.
You can talk as much as you want. We can go on, João. You are the main guest.
Conclude this thought, and then we can discuss it a little bit. So I think as taking it back to the war, there is to whose account goes this invoice? The global South now represents over 40% of the world's economy. Up from 24% just 4 decades ago. So it almost doubled, and the architecture of the resistance is already being built. India and Russia settle 90% of their trade in rupees and rubles. China is eliminating tariffs on 100% of African product categories starting May 1st. Another example is Ghana, that is keeping their cashew processing at home. The Democratic Republic of the Congo is demanding that lithium that is used in batteries, right, be refined in African soil. I think these type of gestures, they're not just gestures, but they could, because I told you I would end up on a positive note, they could and should be the foundation of a trading system that does not require Washington's permission to function.
That would be amazing.
Huh?
Yeah, I love the sentence that does not require Washington permissions to function. And if you see, Marco Rubio was really, really worried about Brazil having its own PIX, which is a way of trading internally, that Brazil is almost no longer using credit cards, American credit cards. And he was really getting mental about Brazil and China trading in their own currencies. Yeah.
And just to wrap up, Wang Yi said this week, that the world cannot regress to the law of the jungle. Having the strongest fist does not equal having the strongest fists does not equal having reason. And Lula had said in Delhi, bring back to what I brought up next week, that developing countries can change the economic logic of the world. All it takes is the will to do so. So I wanted to kind of end on that note, and then think what you think about this and the impacts on the global south of the rise of fuels and this escalation of war. And
we have the video of him. Would you like guys to play it?
Okay.
Sure.
I think we know why he was not invited to the Shield of America.
Essa questão nuclear do Irã em 2010, quando Brasil e Turquia.
I think I got the wrong video.
I can't understand.
I think I got the wrong video. Sorry about that.
Well, I'm going to comment on it, though, because he said something very interesting there. Back in 2010, there was a proposed deal to basically inspect and end any danger of Iran developing nuclear weapons that was actually led by Brazil and Turkey. So right now it's more than proven that they did not have a nuclear program. But even if they did, it's I think everyone who is watching the show knows why the U.S. is there. What we don't know is why they did this now. And even American military are questioning Trump's or Rubio, whose ever judgment it is in doing this right now, right? Because it almost seems. Go ahead.
I think I know why. I'm going to try to address it in my watch, but I didn't address it very well. But I will just say that, there's so many think tank strategy papers that are just saying that China will surpass the U.S. in 5 years. They're saying that over and over. And if their only belief is that they need to be part, they are the unipolar world, they need to be the main primary power in the world, they will not have any chance if they wait. I think that's one of the main calculations here. I think they missed the window, though. That's what I'm hoping. But yeah. I think the window was ever really open because it's not natural either. It's just delusional to think that they would continue to have a homogeny. Actually, the homogeny was always a little bit, hegemony, not homogeny. Their hegemony was always a little bit very precarious anyway. So I think it's always been a little bit delusional. Maybe it's too simple to say that. But I did want to say, okay, so there's, just to respond to some of the comments, one thing, Sarah, you brought this up before, the U.S. base opening up in Paraguay. How does that sort of João, what's your opinion on that? And also someone saying here, very controversial or provoking statement. Lula is incredibly naive. It's irritating. So I wanted you to respond to those two things because they're kind of, I suppose, related.
Well, first I'll start about Paraguay. It's been a long already for many decades. The U.S. has mapped both in Paraguay and in Brazil under the Aquifer Guarani. It's the second largest aquifer in the world. In fact, Coca-Cola has been buying land in Paraguay for the past 3 decades to be able to exploit that water. So that's not the reason they put the base there alone. The U.S. has bases worldwide. But I think it's very nerve-wracking for us Brazilians to have a base in a country that's such a strong ally, or at least was such a strong ally for many years. Brazil and Paraguay, they have a Itaipu, which is one of our largest hydroelectric power plants, and it's a binational corporation that is responsible for, I don't remember the exact percentage, but to a very significant percentage of the electricity use in the whole southern region of Brazil, including a lot of areas that have what is left of our industry. So it's a very strategic spot, So not only as far as its underground water, that it has one of the largest reserves in the world, but also as one of our main energy generation hubs. I mean, you put Itaipu down, and I don't know what happens in Brazil. It'd be chaos, It'd be chaos. Sorry, I just had somebody here call. Put it on silent. So it would be chaos, So I think and additionally, I think it's also a direct threat towards Brazil. It's an intimidation, It's definitely an intimidation. If you think that happened in the exact same week, there's 3 announcements towards Brazil, right? One is the base in Paraguay. The other is that the Brazilian drug trafficking cartels are terrorist groups. The other was a special invoice to talk to a president that, was responsible for a coup d'etat, who's obviously a puppet of Washington and follows Steve Bannon's recipe, So this all happening in the same week. I mean, they're not even trying to hide it anymore, Ileana and Sara. It's kind of a clear message to us. And then that takes me to the second comment that Lula is terribly naive. I don't think Lula is naive. It's a very complicated situation. In diplomacy and world diplomacy is not something that can be resolved, especially by countries that do not have nuclear weapons, by barking louder, So I don't think we're in a position to just bark loud. I do think we have to be cautious, and I do feel that, Lula is cautious to the extent that it's possible. I'm suspicious, but I think he has a very good foreign affairs advisor. And so I think that, they're thinking about all these issues. I got a chance to listen in a little bit. But I think they're thinking of all these issues. It's very complicated, It's very complicated even, to take a stronger position, for instance, to strengthen the BRICS or the relations with China right now, because, look what happened in Venezuela. I don't think we're Venezuela, but, a base in Paraguay. We have terrorist groups in Brazil now, and they're sending a special invoice to, the worst president we ever had that is in jail for crimes he committed. I think is very, there's a clear message there, and we ought to be careful, and Lula better not be naive.
Just to complement what you say, just exactly what you're saying, we saw beginning of this year that the Trump administration signed an executive order, and in this executive order, they were designated 8 cartels in Mexico, Salvador, and Venezuela as what they call foreign terrorist organizations or global terrorist designations. It's called FTO and SDGTs. So this is it's an escalation of the war on drugs and war on terror, because in this way they can apply the Enemies Act. And with the Enemies Act, the president has extraordinary powers upon foreign citizens of countries that are a threat for the US. So that means it's an expansion of American jurisdiction with 0 safeguards. And then you place an American base in Paraguay, and there you go. You can just go through Brazil. Simple as that. It's an incredible threat. And I agree with you. I think Lula is anything but naive. Lula may have, I think we Brazilians never had a revolutionary experience. So we, in general, we don't fully grasp the empire in certain aspects. We think we can talk to America. We think we can agree with them. This is a bit our national identity. Brazilians don't really like conflicts. Brazilians would prefer to talk over above anything. And I don't think we have the same anti-imperialist views that Russia has or China has, but we have been victimized by America, and we remember that. It's the open veins of Latin America. We know how dangerous Trump can be, and this is election year. Lula will need
I was going to bring that up.
Extremely careful, because Trump is already plotting the intervention in Brazil, and João mentioned it. He just mentioned it, and we're going to get into that.
Yeah. I think, just to complement what Sara said, I think, it's election year in Brazil, right? And I think, talking about Lula's naivety or not, there is something here that is very important, which is the public opinion, right? We have a very divided public opinion, I think different, certainly differently than in China. And we have a lot of, about half the population who thinks the U.S. is the best, who thinks, we should make it, yes, but that's real,
Yeah.
So that's the reality, that certainly for the higher middle class and the upper class, they're 95% pro-U.S., That's how the rich people live in Brazil. They don't want us to have an industry. They don't want us to develop sovereignty. They rather make money on the skyrocketing interest rates that we have. That is the second highest in the planet. So they don't need industry. They don't need development. They don't need partnerships with China or anything like that, because they're making money exploiting the people that have the least, So that's it's very important, because and especially in Brazil, it's very important in an election year to somehow reach the middle class. Brazil has somewhat become a middle class country, and even if it's not a totally middle class country, it's the middle class country that dictates the status quo. It's what people believe in, it's what people aspire for. And these people are neo-Pentecostal Christians, evangelical Christians, that are online doom scrolling like crazy, and voting in whoever their pastor tells them to vote. So Lula needs to be cautious, because if he doesn't find a way to appeal to these people, we have a very significant chance that the extreme right wins again. Flávio Bolsonaro, who is the son of the imprisoned president who committed the attempted coup, is already tied up with Lula for in the last polls. So it's not an easy situation. He needs to appeal to these people that are not like pro-China and pro-Russia, and that will react to anything that is sounding too, let's say, left-wing. So he needs to be able to get elected. He needs to appeal to moderates and to basically alienated people that don't know what they're doing. If he doesn't, he will unfortunately lose. So I think that's why also he has to play a game internally. If he was just ruthless towards Trump, like, no, we're going to do BRICS and forget it, this would affect him internally in an election year. So it's a very complicated situation.
Yeah, just to hook on that, I'm going to introduce my watch, which is short actually, and it fits so well what João is saying. Lula needs to be very careful. Donald Trump, in the middle of the Iran disaster, needs a new plan, a collectible win. He'll probably try to sacrifice Cuba, but Latin America is one of his preferred choices. We've just seen Paraguay with Ecuador establishing the first FBI bureau. And now Trump has sent his senior official responsible for U.S. policy towards Brazil. His name is Darren Beatty. And he says he's coming to Brazil. He was coming to Brazil on an official diplomatic mission to the country. Okay, but it's not a diplomatic mission by any recognizable definition. Betty has no meeting scheduled with the government officials, no bilateral agendas, no engagement whatsoever with any Brazilian institutions. His sole plan is to go to prison to visit the former dictator Jair Bolsonaro, a man serving 75 years for plotting a coup d'etat against his democratic elected successor. So, you know, João, Ileana, Brazil does not have a parallel government. So if he's coming, saying he's on an official visit, is he just gonna visit the coupists, the people plotting against? This is not, this cannot be seen as a diplomatic mission. And in an election year, with, as John put, with Bolsonaro's sons running against President Lula, and polls showing a closing gap, it does not take much to see what he was going to do here. This is not diplomacy. This is interference dressed in a diplomatic title. It's a textbook parallel agenda with the coup plotters of Brazil, and I would say a direct intervention in Brazilian national affairs. And then we need to consider who is Darren Beatty. It's even more scary if we consider who he is. Beatty, he was fired during the Trump first administration because he attended a white supremacist conference. And he has attacked Brazilian Supreme Court Minister Moraes, saying that he was the central architect of the censorship and persecution of Jair Bolsonaro. And he also praised the Capitol attack on the 6th of January. This is the type of guy that Trump sends to Brazil with apparent official diplomatic agenda, with meeting no diplomats in Brazil. So I think it's pretty clear here that Trump also called Bolsonaro's conviction a witch hunt. He and Beatty imposed tariffs on Brazil, citing the persecution of Bolsonaro. This was a meddling. You know, Beatty was one of the architects on tariffs on Brazil, saying, I'm going to apply the Magnitsky Act sanctions against this judge, himself, personally, his family, because we want him to remove Jair Bolsonaro's conviction. And it's very interesting how the Brazilian press choose to frame this visit, saying Judge Moraes is not going to allow him to visit. Well, let's put things into perspective here. So if we have all those headlines suggesting that Brazil's Supreme Court was obstructing a diplomatic visit, well, it's not that simple. First of all, Bolsonaro is the maximum security prison with standard visitation rules. And Beatty wants to come outside the visiting hours, claiming his diplomatic status as a justification.
That's insane.
But then, Brazilian Foreign Ministry had not even been notified of his visit because there was none, and the court did what it had to do. Okay, give me your agenda. Let me see if I really need to adjust the ordinary visiting hours for you. And thank God, Brazilian Foreign Mauro Vieira, he did a legal opinion and said, look, there is no diplomatic visit here. I interpret this as meddling in Brazilian national security. You should not allow this moron, this bastard, this fuckwit to come here in Brazil. So this was a correct decision. Of course, this is putting the Brazilian media under censorship, under obstructing this visit, but it's clear text. And I think in this case, the Brazilian Foreign Office, Itamaraty, did a brilliant job. Look, there is a context to this here. This guy is not coming for any diplomatic visit. He's coming to plot a coup d'etat with a guy in jail and trying to create the narrative that we are responsible for censorship. Guess what? We are not following Washington orders. We have our own rules, and you have to play by your own rules. And this is a consistent position of the Brazilian Supreme Court towards American intervention. That's why him and others are attacking Brazilian judicial system as censorship.
It's interesting, if you look at I was just looking up his agenda in Brazil, and it includes a forum on rare earth. No wonder he's coming. On the 18th of March, he will be in São Paulo for this rare earth summit, and essentially with the objective to try to reduce their dependency on China. Right. The other thing that he has officially set up is meetings with Flávio Bolsonaro and Sóstenes Cavalcante, which are extreme right. One is running for president, and the other is one of the most right-wing, totally corrupt congressmen of Brazil. And then he's participating on a forum of freedom and liberty on elections, and security and organized crime. So it relates to the terrorism that I was talking about. It's funny what is in his official agenda and the people he's meeting. And then since his visit to Bolsonaro was denied, after that, he asked for a meeting with Itamaraty, because there was no official visit of him towards any member of the federal government of Brazil whatsoever. He's talking to the opposition. He's talking to an imprisoned president. He's going to the rare earth forum, and to this event that basically reinforces the idea that these groups are terrorist groups. So he has a very clear agenda, I think, of what he's coming to Brazil for. Thank you, Sara. It was very interesting.
It's a coup d'etat on the making. And in Brazil, we have American meddling in the elections. Stephen Bannon helped Bolsonaro in 2018. Openly, we saw in the Epstein files where Bannon is discussing with Epstein, they should keep it quiet, that Bolsonaro was keeping quiet, that Bannon is helping him to interfere in Brazilian elections. So we are in an extreme, vulnerable situation. And it's crystal clear what he came to do here, to prepare for a coup d'etat. Well, guess what? Brazil is not on the prize list of America, not this time around.
Wow. It's very scary times for Brazil. Do you have any other remarks before I go into my watch? Because I think this is actually a really interesting link here. Sarah, in the beginning of the show, you said that Trump needs some sort of win, and he's kind of looking at Latin America as that win. And I'm very much hoping that Brazil is not going to be that win for Trump, Let me just change this before going into mine. But so for my watch, I was just really thinking about the US's current, I tried at least this week to think about what is the US's logistical strategy with Iran. Like, how do they think they might win with Iran? Like, I really was having trouble understanding it. So I did research, and I have to say, spoiler alert, I did not come up with an answer. But what I did do was come up with where they're at. Like, I think all the obstacles against them, and I wanted to sort of discuss it with you here. Like, we talked about why before, and I keep thinking of US imperialism, kind of like, that story about the scorpion on the tortoise, and basically they need to cross the river, and the scorpion's like to the tortoise, just give me a ride across, I promise not to sting you. And they actually go across. The tortoise lets the scorpion on, they go across, and then halfway before they reach the other side of the river, the scorpion stings the tortoise and they both drown. And I think that's basically what the US imperialism is right now. That is their nature. They have no other way but to keep going, to keep expanding, to keep trying to contain China, quote unquote. And so this is why they're doing it. However, how they think they're going to win in this particular case, like João, I think you already sort of question this is really hard to conceive, because in the first 2 weeks of the US-Israeli war on Iran, US has blown through years of precision weapons. The first 2 days alone cost $5.6 billion with hundreds of Tomahawk missiles. Apparently, they went through 10% of their total stockpile, which they took, I think, over a decade to stockpile. So they went through 400 Tomahawk missiles in 72 hours, and they only have 4,000 Tomahawk missiles. And the first 6 days totaled apparently $11.3 billion. So this is already really hard to imagine, right? But the current production rate is 90 to 100 missiles per year. So, if you do that calculation, it's going to take them like 5 years to replace, basically 4 to 5 years to replace what they've lost in the first 72 hours. And Raytheon has pledged to ramp up Tomahawk productions to 1,000 missiles per year, but that's going to take them 7 years. So that's not even this year. So it's like kind of absolutely insane. And that is, that is even separate from the fact that the $2 billion in equipment, including $1.1 billion in warning radar in Qatar, was damaged, and the THAAD components in the UAE, and also probably why they're moving parts of the THAAD anti-missile system from South Korea. So they're actually moving their munitions or their systems from different parts of the world. So all this is like already paints a really ridiculous picture for the US. And this is before we even start talking about the rare earth mineral issue with China, because rare earth mineral control regulations, the first one that China really put forth was in April 4th of 2025. They restricted 7 heavy rare earth critical for military applications, or rare earth minerals for military applications, including for the F-35 fighter jet motors and missile guidance systems. These are really, really important for this war in Iran, right? That was obviously in response to the whole tariff trade war, remember, of last year. And then in October of last year, China dramatically escalated these rare earth export controls by adding 5 more elements, and also most significantly making an extraterritorial jurisdiction, meaning that any foreign-made product containing as little as 0.1% Chinese origin rare earths now required a Chinese export license. And they also introduced a 50% penetration rule that automatically blacklisted any company majority owned by entities already on China's control list. So this is very, very aggressive, but it is absolutely just mirroring the US sanction. This is how US sanctions works. It's secondary sanctions. It's very punitive, right? But in this particular case, it was targeting dual use military production. So if we remember, that's like a huge escalation. It caused a lot of headlines. It caused the US to kind of freak out. And then a month later, Trump met with Xi Jinping in South Korea to talk about like lessening the trade wars. They came away with certain concessions. What I didn't know then, until I talked to KJ No and Global Majority for Peace, was basically from that meeting, apparently like Trump and his admin they were all sort of boasting that they had gotten the rare earth mineral controls postponed for 1 year, but they had only gotten the October 2025 ones postponed for 1 year, but not even completely postponed. What they sort of got in exchange for the concessions was just general license. Like a general license was agreed, like they could apply for general license for US end users, but that license doesn't get granted unless Beijing says so. So that's not like a real postponement of the and the April 2025 things are still in effect. And it's really, really And what we're talking about is like actual blueprints, chemical formulas, process know-how, skilled technicians, technical data required to build and operate rare earth processing. They're actually also blocking the ability to be able to create the technologies that will allow these countries to have their own refineries. Because remember, China refines over 90% of rare earth minerals. Over 70% is just the mining of rare earth minerals. So they have 70% of that. But the actual refining is over 90%. So that's effectively a monopoly. Now, how is Trump actually going to, how are they addressing this? One is what you were saying with like trying to go to Brazil. They have like certain things that they're trying to do. But wait, before I just move on to that, I would just say that the other thing that happened, I think, in February was that the Ministry of Commerce of the People's Republic of China imposed border export controls onto Japan. Now, this is like kind of like game over in terms of this is what the October controls from 2025 that were extremely rigorous. Now they're putting it on Japan. But in the language that they used here, they're saying any dual control rules on exports of dual use items to Japan involving Japanese military end users, military end users, and other end users / end uses that may contribute to enhancing Japan's military capabilities, which is the US. Because the US, even though this text is specifically about Japan, the US is the primary driver of Japan's military enhancement. It includes the nuclear umbrella. It co-produces advanced weapons with Japan. It also has joint military exercises. It maintains 54,000 US troops in Japan. That is the most in the world for US foreign military troops. So it is the US that is behind that. It's the US that's affected by these export controls. So what did Trump do in response? He launched the Project Vault, the $12 billion emergency response in February of this year, just less than a month before striking Iran, which is a little bit slow, I would say. But essentially it's $12 billion made up of a $10 billion loan from the government ban, the Import-Export Bank, and $2 billion from private companies like Boeing and GM, etc. And it works like a sort of like a Costco subscription membership where they pay like a fee and then they promise to buy certain amounts at an agreed price. So this is just like a stockpile, right? Stockpile of rare earth minerals. But how long is this supposed to last? Its goal is only to last for 60 days worth of backup. 60 days, when you consider that in order for them to compete with China in terms of refineries, they're looking at like experts saying something like anywhere from like 25 years to get to where China is, to like more optimistic estimates like 10 years. It would take 10 years to build the refinery and supply chain that China currently monopolizes. But they've only done a stockpile for 60 days. But then, of course, they've also been pursuing international partnerships. Like Australia and the US have signed a framework committing to $1 billion in joint financing for mining and processing projects. In February, the US signed 11 new bilateral frameworks. And they also launched the Forum on Resource and Geostrategic Engagement with over 50 partner nations. And then they also, the Export-Import Bank also issued $14.8 billion in letters of interest for global critical mineral projects, which include Brazil, the rare earth processing in Brazil. But
India came first. India has already tried to put its hand on Brazil's rare earth. Yeah, that was the agreement, the MOU between Modi and India, but Brazil has no capacity to process it.
Yeah, nobody does. So
neither India.
Neither India. The entire world needs at least 10 years minimum. Most optimistic projection is 10 years they need. And that's assuming that China is just going to stand still and not advance its abilities.
But you know, Ileana, I think Trump has a plan. Maybe we're just escaping our eyes. Look at his plan.
That's what
Donald Trump has appointed Erica Kirk, the widow of Charlie Kirk, to the United States Air Force leadership. I think that's going to go incredibly well. Let's see this. With her mega hair.
Oh God. Yeah, so like Erica Kirk, widow of the late Charlie Kirk, she has a background in beauty pageants and real estate. So I don't know.
She's Erica Kirk will advise the Air Force on new issues affecting the academy. I think it's a perfect match. And, you know, actually, we know what is this about. This is about reconciling with his MAGA base that don't want what they call Israel first.
Yeah. I'd like to comment on the rare earth. I thought it was very interesting what you brought, Ileana, and I'd like to bring just a few numbers towards this. While we were speaking, I was looking it up. You know, China is the largest, has the largest reserves of rare earth, right? It's about 49% of all the rare earth. And guess who's number 2?
Brazil?
Ah, you got it. Brazil has 23%, you know, so maybe that's why they're in Paraguay. I don't know. And so it's important as well to note, I think it's, you know, we have this rare earth. We have to know what to do with them. You know, exploiting them has a huge impact on the environment. But as you said, they're behind, the rare earth are behind the technology of many missile guidance systems, of our phones, of computers, and a lot, you know, drones, and definitely a lot of war machinery. And so the United States needs it. As it is, they only have 2% of the national reserves of rare earth around the world. Just in comparison, Greenland, which they were looking at, has about the same, has 1.7, right? But it's right next door. It's easy to get. But obviously, they're not going to be able to get China's rare earth. And the third largest producer, the third largest reserves is India. So India, Australia, Russia, Vietnam, and then the States. The second is Brazil, with 23%. It's, you know, if we think we're not going to get any pressure because of that, we're totally, you know,
you're right.
We have to be very wary of that. This is one of the main resources for the 21st century. They're also behind the car batteries. If we're making a transition from fossil fuels to electric vehicles, we also need this rare earth. So these minerals, they're essential to the development and transition into a green economy, so to say. And whoever holds, you know, not only the reserves, but especially, as you said, the processing is going to be one of the key players. And that's where Brazil needs to be very wary, and where Lula should not be naive. And in many cases, I think we are overly naive. And, you know, take this opportunity to be, you know, to create an industry in Brazil. We don't have an industry. We have been moving away from any industrial type of, you know, economic model since the 70s, you know, and especially when Fernando Henrique came to power, neoliberal government, neoliberal policies, even more. It's all agribusiness and, you know, exploiting minerals. So we need to take this as an opportunity to strengthen the global South and learn something from China and, you know, to a certain extent, India and Russia as well, and learn how to process those rare earth metals ourselves.
João,
right now, as is.
João, and what do you think we will take this opportunity? Do you think is it the radar of the Brazilian government, since you're very close to it?
Yeah, I think they're thinking about it. However, it's important to note that the United States is already present in Brazil. The largest rare earth, it's not a factory, but processing is in Goiás, in Serra Verde, close to Minasul, and it's an American company that operates it. In fact, right now, as is, almost 100% of all rare earth minerals processing in Brazil occurs by American corporations. So they're already coming in. So even if Lula wins and they don't do a coup, they have their ways. It's very important for us to be wary of that. There's strong ties of the U.S. government with the government of Zema in Minas Gerais that has significant reserves. There's strong ties with Caiado of Goiás, where the only operating plant exists. And and there's a special interest in the Amazon region because that's the richest area right now. There's a lot happening in the Cerrado, in the Savannah area, but we know the largest reserves are in fact under the Amazon soil and will require a big amount of deforestation to exploit. But I just wanted to point that I thought it was very interesting all the things you brought, and I think it's very important that Brazil uses this opportunity to develop its industry, to develop local technology, and not be dependent on the U.S. And if we are to work with India and China, we need to have transfer of technology. We need to make sure that we develop the capacity of processing these minerals locally, and this can be used as an instrument of transitioning this country onto a whole another level. I hope we don't miss this opportunity.
I think that's an issue that you're bringing up that's so interesting and so, I think, very, very difficult right now, is that with this export controls, with U.S. having the presence that it has in Brazil, it would make Brazil under these types of export bans, because why would you would be essentially giving Brazil the technology that it would then be able to transfer into the US. And I think just to sort of explain why it would take so long to develop, and also the other thing I'm thinking for Brazil is the environmental impact, is that, China has been working on these technologies since 1972. And in the beginning, it was extremely detrimental to the environment, but they have been innovating to make it a much more cleaner process, as they're also very much into this green transition and green revolution. So if the US, it does not have access to that technology, they're probably using much worse technologies on Brazilian land that will be destroying the Brazilian environment. And they will have less incentives to really innovate the way that China innovated in terms of making it cleaner and safer for the people, because it's in a different country that they don't give a shit about, So this really puts two wrenches in there for Brazil, unfortunately.
Yeah. Right now, as is, it's very funny because we have basically this Serra Verde, where DFC, this is a majority American fund that is exploiting the rare earth. They have to send it to China to be processed. So I know it's insane, right? So there's an American company that exploits it in Brazil, and that then has to send it to China because in the US they do not have the capacity of refining this volume of rare earth. So it's very funny how the world architects, and I think it's important. I think it's important that Brazil develops this internally, because as we know, China is our friend, but I think it's very important that we develop the refinement of this rare earth, not to change, so that we don't simply change the dependency from one superpower to another. So I think there is a will, in the Brazilian government to make investment with the transfer of technology, so that we can really then develop this industry. And it might take years, as you said, but we got to start. If we don't start, no, it's took China years. Yeah, but if we do this, we're going to continue just.
But it also makes sense that, China has in the past historically, especially with the global South, been very amenable to transfer our technology. It's like it's part of the model in terms of the Belt and Road Initiative. So it's a little bit worrying though, if it is going to be used against all of us, like say Trump's agenda against Brazil, like.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, if you want to stop him, just stop providing him with rare earth minerals, But I think they won't have any bombs. They won't have any drones. They won't have NVIDIA chips. It's fine. I mean, it's not going to happen, right? Because
I think that's the thing that they've done. Like, when I'm looking at the regulations and stuff, there's so many things in it that suggest that they really have put so many controls in that how, like, even in terms of having to get license from Beijing, you still have to have them process everything for you. So they can say no as well. So I think that is why, like, when we're thinking about why are they doing this now against Iran, that is part of it. Although why they're using so many of their weapons I think they thought it would be over. Like they
thought. Yeah, they probably thought we're just going to bomb a few days. As long as we don't have the Khamenei there, we will disrupt the country, will be disarray. Guess what? It wasn't.
Right. Yeah. So that's probably a huge underestimation there. But yeah, I think it's like somewhat game over. It's not really game over, but I mean the pathway to game over is there.
It's the pathway to game over. I think along that pathway, they can do a lot of damage, even like unsurpassable damage. So it's very dangerous. We have to be very wary. Yeah, I mean, right now, I was just looking up the numbers. 87% of the rare earth compounds that the U.S. have come from China right now, right? The processed rare earth minerals.
Wow, so, 87, yeah.
Yep. So that's huge. If you think about that, China has the U.S. in their hands. You just got to do it strategically, right? But certainly as far, I mean, that's something I've been thinking about. It's because those things are so necessary for the type of wars we fight now in the 21st century, or that they fight really, or that they impose on people. Whoever controls this controls the world.
That's a significant thing about the Japan new I don't know what to call it, the new thing that they just passed, because it's specifically clear, like in terms of Japan, they can say like this is a genuine self-defense issue. I mean, for China, because Japan already killed like over 30 million Chinese people, etc. They have, and they use the same language as well when they did it, right? So they can really claim that. And so I do think that is pretty comprehensive in terms of the amount of companies that they put on that list, the export controls, etc. It's like the first round of what may be coming, like obviously they can't just ban all rare earths, right? This is dual use rare earths with military use. But it is, I think, the US, I mean, if I was in the US, I would be really terrified to see that and how they're going to implement it. They implemented it immediately. So we'll see what happens. But you're right. Like the US does not have any real cards right now, except for nuclear weapons. So this is why I'm like, it is very worrying that if the US really, now they're doing troop deployment, and people in the US are like, desert the military, don't sign up for the military, whatever you do, don't, but they're doing troop deployment now, and they are talking about small targeted nuclear weapons use. So we have to be really aware that could be the next stage that they're, genuinely seriously going to look at.
Yeah. And I think this is one of the concerns raised by military people in the US. When you have power, you have authority, either a natural authority. And when you don't have power, you are violent. Violence is the means of last resort, also in the sense that when I don't have anything else, I would use violence, and they're extremely violent. And I think this is really something to worry about. Israel is capable of anything, as the US enclave in the Middle East, and Trump and Netanyahu together, they are capable of anything as well. This folie à deux, I think it's a real concern here.
Okay, well, that go ahead. Please,
no,
please.
I'm gonna have to step out. So I just wanted to wrap up with, finishing this whole idea around the rare earth and what the global South can do. I think there's obviously a rat race towards who controls rare earth around the world. But it's not about who's just digging the holes, right? So in Brazil we have a lot of rare earth, and it's it's starting to be exploited more and more, but we're just digging holes. In the end of the game, I think it's a lot more about chemistry. Brazil sits on the second largest reserves of the world, but the US capital is financing its extraction, and China is refining 90% of that. So until Brazil and its partners built a domestic separation capacity for this rare earth, the country is at risk of swapping dependency from one superpower to the other. So I think the strategic... go ahead.
I mean, I would also say that, I interviewed someone from Brazil de Fato. Is that correct? Is that the name of it? Yes. And he was talking about how Brazil has this attitude towards... Because Brazil is an incredible resource-rich country, in multiple ways. And so they have this they had historically, and I suppose you would not deny that they're looking to see how they can change that. But the export of raw materials, basically, they need to move out of that model. And it's not even about necessarily the dependence, it's like, you're right, you cannot have that dependence on any country, including China. But it's also that, with stronger agreements with China, you can also have inbuilt in that the skill sharing, tech sharing, that can be part of your agreement. But you as a country, and I don't mean just Brazil, every single country in the world needs to understand that. You can do that with China, you cannot do that with the US. You cannot do that with imperialism. So it behooves every country to when they're negotiating, make sure they negotiate out of the raw material export model, which is just a colonial model. So to your point, there is a pathway forward.
Oh, for sure. And I think to a certain extent, the Brazilian government is trying to do that. And it was actually moving a lot in a fiercer force up until Trump imposed the tariffs. I do think that Brazil took a step back and is a little bit more cautious in anything related to to strengthening those relations with China and BRICS in general. In many ways, and that's my opinion, because of fear, of what happened in Venezuela, what's happening in Iran. We're right next door. Now they have a base in Paraguay. Brazil has been talking about a military partnership with China and India, but at the same time, it's cautious, So I think you're absolutely right. The way to go is partnership between the global South countries, so that they can build domestic and regional value chains, And I think China is much more willing to transfer technology in their investment deals than the US is, which is not interested in doing that whatsoever. And then, it'd be interesting to be able to coordinate through regional blocks. But right now, South America is so divided, right? We have so many right-wing governments. If you look at the map of, I saw that the other day, right-wing and left-wing in South America now, it's like the whole, more than half of it is right-wing. So it's very hard to have a cohesive voice like we had maybe 20 years ago. And then I think we do have to invest these revenues that we get from rare earth strategically, to diversify our economy, renewable energy, education. We need to like we planned to do it with the pré-sal, right? And then, the whole coup happened and the oil was taken away from us. And I think it's an opportunity for us to also embrace, a circular economy, of reusing the recycling the rare earths and introducing these hubs like it is in China. In China, old phones get totally repurposed. They're able to mine for rare earth old phones, so we need that technology here. And I think if we do those things and we learn how to work together, especially with our BRICS partners, we can ensure to have, something that really helps the world, that brings technological sovereignty, shares prosperity, and helps the world be more equitable. I told you I was going to end up on a positive note today.
That's good.
Thank you so much, João. This absolutely 100% believe in what you just said. And let's talk about Global South Rising, guys.
Yeah. So I think we can say goodbye for today and be next week, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And please, join our Patreon and support us and, do hypes. You can do hypes now. I didn't even know that. But
what is hype?
Apparently, when you want to and then they'll say, do you want to hype this video? And then if you hype it, we get
that's good.
We don't get any money.
Super
Yeah, it's it helps the algorithm. It helps people find us. So of course, please do that. And there's all these links on the bottom for in any way you want to support us. So thank you for watching. And we'll see you guys next week. Thank you, João.
Thank you. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye.